You've heard of Gandhi's famous protests, right? Of course. But what if I told you they weren't just separate random events? What if they were all part of one single, brilliant 30-year strategy, a plan to do the impossible? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. The story of a revolution in 3 acts that literally changed the world.
So let's just stop and think about this for a second. How do you defeat an empire? And not just any empire, but the British Empire, probably the most powerful force on the planet at the time. You have no army, no real weapons to speak of, so what's the plan? What could you possibly do?
Okay, now here's the kicker. The one rule you cannot break. You have to do it all without firing a single shot. The entire strategy, from top to bottom, had to be nonviolent. I mean, fighting an empire is one thing, but doing it without any weapons, relying on nothing but your moral high ground and people power, that's a whole other level.
And Gandhi's answer? It was just brilliant. He didn't see it as one big, messy fight. No, he saw it as a grand 3-act play. Where each act builds on the one before it. You slowly ramp up the pressure, raise the stakes, and in the process, you don't just fight a government, you change the hearts and minds of an entire nation.
So Act 1, it's called non-cooperation. And the first move isn't a punch, it's a step back, a massive, coordinated withdrawal. The idea was simple but profound, to show the world and the British themselves that their empire couldn't run for a single day without the cooperation of the Indian people.
So what kicked it all off? Pure, raw outrage. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre, where British troops just opened fire on an unarmed crowd, and these repressive new laws. In response, the plan was passive refusal. Boycott everything British. But, and this is so important, it ended with a critical lesson. When a single incident at a place called Chauri Chaura turned violent, Gandhi, sticking to his principles, called the whole thing off. The entire movement. That discipline is key.
And the tactics? Oh, they were smart. They were designed to hit the empire in 2 places it really cared about: its legitimacy and its bank account. People boycotted British goods, which led to promoting swadeshi, or Indian-made products. The spinning wheel and khadi cloth became these incredible symbols of self-reliance. But the biggest deal? For the very first time, this wasn't some high-minded debate for the elites. This was a movement of the people for the people.
So Act 1 was a success. In a way, it planted the seed. It proved that mass resistance was possible. But calling it off because of one violent incident? That showed a really hard truth. Just saying no and withdrawing wasn't going to be enough. The strategy needed to get smarter. It had to evolve.
And this is where you see the genius of the long-term plan. This is the escalation. The strategy moves from passive refusal, which is basically just saying we won't play, to active defiance. Now, the goal isn't just to ignore the system. It's to walk right up to it, look it in the eye, and intentionally break its most unfair laws, right in front of everyone.
And that brings us to Act 2, civil disobedience. It's a decade later, and the movement has learned its lessons. Now they're ready for something much more direct, much more confrontational. This is defiance, front and center.
The trigger this time was just perfect: the British salt tax. Why? Because it hit everyone, especially the poorest of the poor. It was a universally hated law. And the action? The famous Salt March. It was pure political theater, designed to get the world's attention, and boy, did it work. It led to mass arrests, sure, but it also did something incredible. It forced the British to come to the negotiating table with the Gandhi-Irwin Pact.
So, picture this. March 12, 1930. Gandhi starts walking. For 24 days, the world watches. The media is all over it. And then, he gets to the sea at a village called Dandi. He bends down, picks up a little lump of salty mud, and breaks the law. And with that one, tiny, symbolic act, a fire of defiance spreads across the entire country.
240 miles. Let that sink in. He walked 240 miles. This wasn't just a protest march, it was a pilgrimage. He turned this political act into something deeply moral, almost spiritual, that just electrified the nation.
But here's the thing. Act 2 didn't bring independence. The Gandhi-Irwin Pact was a big deal, don't get me wrong. It was a huge symbolic win, the British negotiating with Indians as equals for the first time. But full freedom? Nope, still out of reach, which means the stage was set for a final act, the climax.
And that brings us to Act 3, quit India. Now the world is at war, World War II, and the patience has run out. The time for talking, for negotiating, it's over.
The demand is now brutally simple and totally non-negotiable.
So what lit the final fuse? Well, Britain dragged India into World War II without even asking. Then a British diplomatic mission failed to promise any real power. So the response was one clear demand: quit India, just leave. The British reaction was to come down hard, with overwhelming force. But in doing that, they basically admitted their rule was only based on violence, which completely destroyed any moral authority they claimed to have.
And you can feel the shift. On August 8, 1942, Gandhi gives his most electrifying speech. His call to action? Do or die. I mean, that's not a suggestion. That's an ultimatum. It means this is the final push, and there's no going back. The British didn't hesitate. The response was immediate and harsh. More than 100,000 people arrested. Think about that number. The entire leadership of the Congress Party was thrown in jail overnight. The scale of that crackdown just goes to show you how seriously they took this threat. They were running scared.
And here's the wild paradox of the whole thing. Tactically, on the ground, the movement was crushed. But strategically, it was a knockout victory. Why? Because it proved to the British and to the whole world that they could only hold on to India by brute force. And with a world war draining their resources, that was a price they just couldn't afford to pay anymore.
So when you look back at this incredible 30-year saga, what's the takeaway? It's not about whether any single act won or lost. It's about the combined pressure, the cumulative effect of all three acts, one after another over decades. You can really break the victory down into three pieces. First, these movements took the fight for freedom from a few elites and gave it to the masses. Second, they systematically chipped away at the empire's economic and moral power. And third, and this is the most important part, no single movement was the magic bullet. But taken together, the relentless, escalating pressure made Indian independence in 1947 pretty much inevitable.
And that leaves us with a really big question for today, doesn't it? In a world that's still got plenty of its own problems, what can we learn from a strategy like this? A strategy that was patient, that was smart about how it escalated, and that, in the end, defeated one of the greatest empires in history. Not with guns, but with the power of an idea.